Hey, Patrick.
Hey, Michael J.
So, Grand Prix Porto Alegre has just finished as we're beginning this podcast. An exciting Grand Prix is that Brazil? Porto Alegre?
Yeah.
So, interesting stuff there, which we will get to in a second. But before we start, I just wanted to shout out to all of our generous patrons. Thanks for making Top Level Podcast available to everyone. You are our patrons.
Yeah, special shout out to Jack Hart. Thank you for helping make it possible for us to be here every week,
Thanks so much, Jack. So, what did you think about the Porto Alegre results? It's a little bit different for the top end of Standard this week.
A little. Relative to recent weeks, definitely a little bit, but it's still like literally half Mardu. There's just Mardu vehicles everywhere, right? There were a few other though. There's only 2 or 3 Mardu vehicle decks in the top 8, but the top 32 was also littered with them, and the day 2 was also littered with them. But it was nice to see. Obviously there were several copycat decks too, which is a lot of what we've been seeing. But a couple green-black decks and then one teamer deck.
Yeah, so I think that it's worth starting talking about this teamer deck played by Victor Fernando Silva. Victor was the victor in Porto Alegre, and he played a deck that we've kind of hinted at or talked a little bit about a couple of times, but never really super focused on. But just in a question of whether you should be playing 21 or 26 lands in your Dynavolt Tower deck, Victor went with 22 and 4 Attune with Aether. So
just one Anticipate. Interestingly.
Oh, he broke the mold.
Yes.
He broke out of the 3 Anticipate mold.
Yes. So there's a lot to unpack with this build of Teamer Tower. It's the basic recipe of starting with 4 Torrential Gearhulk, 4 Dynavolt Tower, and then just all sorceries and instants. That part, great. Love it. Obviously, not everybody got to that page yet anyway, but one of the things that I think is so sweet about this build is that Attune with Aether lets him play 26 land, but get extra triggers for his Dynavolt Tower.
Yeah, I love starting on Attune with Aether. Like, it kind of sets the stage for his deck. If you're playing the Dynavolt Tower strategy, it's not like the worst thing in the world, but it is kind of annoying to start with not enough energy to activate it the first time. And you just kind of have to earn your way into it. Just starting with a base of a couple energy is pretty cool.
Well, but it's not even just that. It's obviously you can start with a base early on, but later in the game, normally the lands you draw, they're not powering your tower. But every Attune with Aether you draw, that's 4 energy for your Dynavolt Tower right there. So you're actually getting an extra bonus, because normally Attune with Aether is just giving you the 2 energy. And, obviously, don't want to double count it too much. It's just that Dynavolt Tower doesn't trigger off of having a 26th land in your deck. But if instead you have an Attune with Aether, then you can trigger your Dynavolt Tower in extra time.
Yeah, it is powerful.
It also lets you set up the turn 1 Attune with Aether so that your Harness Lightning can kill Felidar Guardian reliably or Heart of Kirin reliably right out the gate.
Oh, that is also powerful. So you mentioned that just playing 4 Torrential Gearhulk is his only creatures. When we originally saw kind of the blue-red tower deck back, I think 2 Pro Tours ago, the deck maybe had 1 or so Torrential Gearhulks in the main deck. When you played it at Grand Prix Denver, you played 3, is that right? Did you play 4?
I don't recall. I don't recall that one. Somebody else.
One.
Oh, yeah. So I got that list handed to me. So definitely not. Dude, it's so much easier for me to remember the decks I build.
But the Teamer Tower decks that have kind of been peppering near the top of top tournaments. This is the first one we're seeing winning a Grand Prix. Have been playing a bunch of other kind of creatures, right? Like Rogue Refiners, Shielded Aether Thieves. This is the first time I think I've seen just four Torrential Gearhulks is a line in the sand in terms of how many Torrential Gearhulks you're going to play. And I actually personally think it's odd to have no No Rogue Refiners. Shielded Aether Thief I could give or take.
Well, no. See, I don't know. Rogue Refiner, I actually like the move away from Rogue Refiner here because at this point there's just so many shocks, and people are just playing shock and Fatal Push and Harness Lightning and all these different creature removal spells, Grasp with Darkness, all of it, everything, Unlicensed Disintegration. The nice thing about having Torrential Gearhulk be your creature, outside of the fact that it dodges almost all those removal spells and comes down late enough that you can, and with value so that you can just not care as much if they unlicense it. But you don't want to just turn on their shock so that you, that's a huge tempo loss. And even though you're, up a card, that's not the thing that ends up being that's not what the battle against Mardu is all about. Dynavolt Tower will win the game for you all by itself if you just don't die. So you need to really, really, really focus on speed and consistency early on, and the use of Rogue Refiner as a blocker is just not realistic right now. So, and as an attacking threat, people have too many answers.
On that kind of note of speed and consistency, do you think it's odd that this version of this deck doesn't have any shocks at all itself? Shock A is obviously it's a card that you can potentially play to break up the Felidar Guardian combo, but isn't it kind of awesome against your opponent's first turn 3/1? I really wouldn't mind having that card.
Yeah, so it ends up coming down to the marginal utility of a shock versus Incendiary Flow, Natural Obsolescence, Horribly Awry, any sort of... obviously Harness Lightning is the best one of those, right? But, once you're getting into the shock in a deck that's getting its red from Attune with Aether, from Aether Hub, this is a deck that only has 6 ways to play shock on turn 1. Most of the time, you're just playing shock not on the first turn anyway. How much value do you get out of the option of playing shock and one of your 2... This deck only has 2 tap lands other than the Attune with Aether. So, are you going to go turn 1 Attune with the Aether, turn 2 Mountain Shock, and then just waste the other mana?
I think that there's an argument to be made that you could be filling the mana holes, right? On turn 3 or turn 4, you can do Anticipate and Shock or Negate and Shock, or you can Dynavolt Tower, cast Shock, set up Dynavolt Tower. You've used the open mana to cast the Shock. You can be putting a couple of energy with the Dynavolt Tower.
But all you have is a Shock. How much have you benefited compared to the Incendiary Flow?
In my opinion, they're very different, right? So the Shock is good because it can break up the Felidar Guardian combo. The Shock is good in those cases, which I agree. There are only 6 lands that you can play in the first turn that will let you cast it. 4 of those 6 lands, you would be casting it at great cost, right? So utilizing your energy to cast Shock on the first turn is not something you probably want to do in this deck. But taking a 3/1 off of your life total that earlier in the game that's great when you're playing against Mardu. And I don't know, you have different options.
I would way rather
because it kills Scrap Heap Scrounger.
Right, I would way rather have Incendiary Flow against Mardu for what we're trying to accomplish here. That's why we have Incendiary Flow instead of Shock. It's because Scrap Heap Scrounger is just so much more important. That's the battle that actually matters. Because the incidental value of being able to break up the Saheeli combo. You're talking about a deck that has 10 main deck counterspells and 4 Torrential Gearhulks to rebuy them. Plus, it doesn't even matter anyway because if you just have a Dynavolt Tower in play, they can never win. You just play Dynavolt Tower and they're done.
As long as you've got some energy, right?
Right.
It's real hard to play around that. You mean from a combo perspective.
Right. What I mean is that, from a combo perspective, you can, the threat of Dynavolt Tower breaking up the combo is so much that's so much bigger of a disruption to their game plan than the incidental shock, right? And it's not like you get zero of the value of the shock anyway, because they don't know you don't have shock necessarily.
So there's some, interesting stuff on the reactive spells here. So in addition to 2 Incendiary Flows, like you mentioned, Patrick, he's got 3 Negate, 3 Void Shatter, that's 6, 2 Disallow, that's 8, 2 Horribly Awry, that's 10 main deck permission spells. I want to say that's more than we've seen in a deck like this in some time.
Oh, yeah. Particularly a successful one. and there's 4 more counterspells in the sideboard. Another Negate, a Void Shatter, and a Dispel. But before looking too much at the sideboard, I kind of wanted to call out something that I thought was there's a subtle brilliance to the removal package here. So, Incendiary Flow, exiles. The 2 natural obsolescence, they effectively exile because they put the Scrap Heap Scrounger on the bottom. Void Shatter, exile. Horribly Awry, exiles. This deck he's literally using 9 different exile effects in the main deck. So that's just, I think it's, like, this is a deck that is built making completely warping its strategy around Scrap Heap Scrounger, Gideon, Unlicensed Disintegration, and so on.
Yeah, so
right. This deck, I mean, this is just, I think, a brilliant metagame move. This is a meaningfully different teamer tower deck than some of the versions we've seen in previous weeks.
Yeah, using Natural Obsolescence against the Scrap Heap Scrounger is pretty sexy.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And the Kozilek's return is a dimension we haven't seen in a while.
He doesn't get like any rebuy value out of that, right? It's just
no, he does. No, he rebuys it with Torrential Gearhulk sometimes.
Gearhulk, yeah, sure.
It doesn't trigger it, but he can just replay it at instant speed with his Gearhulk.
Yeah, I think I like this because a lot of these Teamer Tower decks have been playing like 1 Release the Gremlins and then 1 green instant in the main deck. But I think I like this double Natural Obsolescence strategy. Yeah,
particularly, I mean, I kind of would actually play more because I think there's going to be a big uptick in Dynavolt Tower anyway.
In the main deck?
Yep.
If you think there's going to be a big uptick in Dynavolt Tower, this is what I think. I would, if it were me, I would be enchanting my sideboard. I would be casting Blue-Red 1. I would be Howling Mining everyone. They would be taking 2 damage. That would be my sideboard.
But I'm just playing a bunch of Natural Obsolescences anyway.
I'm just saying, like, the more the merrier, right? Like, if you...
No, I don't know if that's going to be that good of a plan. I mean, we're talking about a deck that is just, like, if you just are loaded up with negates and Natural Obsolescences, I mean, I don't know. It might not even be good.
I think it would be very good.
And that's to say nothing of the fact that he has 10 creatures in the sideboard.
I think, like, a lot of the time you're playing Mirror Matched, you're like on the play especially, you're just going to tap 3 and try to stick your thing. Like, because if the Dynavolt Tower sticks, either they have their Natural Obsolescence or whatever answer they have right then and there, which is like relatively low chance at that point in the game. And then if they don't have it then and there, you have like your whole side, all whatever your subsequent draw steps, your sideboard to draw your dispels, to draw whatever permission you're going to draw to defend it, and keeping it in play is really important, right? I mean, obviously it depends on what they did in their first couple of turns, but I think just trying to stick it there, and then if you have multiple different things that you can stick on turn 3, you can just run them out of Natural Obsolescences. Like at turn 4, you can just go like, cast your 3 and then have a Dispel up. That's a potential thing that can happen, and again, you can stick it, and it's just real tough, right?
Maybe. We'll see. I mean, I'm not sure I would want to attack part of the benefit of and obviously, I mean, that's a powerful card, but part of the benefit is how much it was just not realistic for people to get rid of it. And that's just not the case now. It's not even just that people can play a color that can get rid of it. They also have enough incentive to do so in their main deck already. So it's just, I don't know.
It sounds like you love this sideboard strategy of Long Tusk Cubs and Tireless Trackers and maybe even Narnam Renegades. The Narnam Renegade seems like the least interesting of the trio to me, but the other two seem pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of the Cub and the Tracker here, and I generally just think that the Renegade is a little bit underrated as a card. However, it's a little bit it's not at its best in this list.
It's so just not...
it's hard for me to get I could believe it. Like maybe it just is like the most efficient way to trade up against big fat green creatures. Like maybe that's actually just so crucial to the anti-Winding Constrictor plan. It might be, like it's not like Temur has an abundance of ways to deal with fatties, but like if it's me, and maybe I'm being greedy, but if it's me, I want to get Confiscation Coup in here.
I think Confiscation Coup might be exciting. I was just thinking if you're gonna go the Narnam Renegade route, like how's this deck even triggering Revolt?
It's a 1/2 Death Touch is pretty good.
Yeah, but is that so much better as a 1/2 than Narwood Dryad as a 1/1, which might actually be a 3/3 sometimes? Like this deck has
I think
artifacts, instants, sorceries, and lands.
No. But the thing is that you're not. It's a long time before anything is going to the graveyard. But first of all, there's no land.
I think there's no have evolving wilds here, right?
Right. There's no looting effects. So, like, you're not really getting any land in your graveyard. You're getting instant easily. Sorcery is not even, like, easy. And then, so what? You literally have to just wait until a Torrential Gearhulk goes to your graveyard for your Narwood Dryad to pay you? Versus the Narnam Renegade doesn't get shot by Walking Ballista as easily.
I guess I can buy that.
I'm not saying it's great. I'm just saying that, to me, Narnam Renegade is, like, no question better than Narwood Dryad in this deck.
See, I think that the games that you would have this in as a defensive card, you might have other creatures in your deck at the same time. Like, I think people side in Tireless Trackers, like, a lot. No matter what strategy their opponent is, they could bring in some number of Tireless Trackers. Yeah,
but, I mean, that true, and that's important, but that is the primary way to power up the Renegade. Because, like, you just crack a clue, right? I mean, it's not like that's super fast or anything, but it is meaningful that the 4 trackers can actually power up your Renegades.
Yeah, I mean, I agree it's not super fast, but 2 Narnam Renegades is not super consistent to be your first turn play, right? So it's okay that that's not fast. You could easily just top deck 1 on turn 6.
Yeah. Yep. But, no, I think this is this is a masterpiece right here. I love I love what's going on here. The use of Kozilek's Return, it's not like it's like super great of a card right at the moment. However, it definitely has its moments, and it can really, really be a crucial part of catching up against Gideon.
Yeah, it kills like everything in the Mardu deck.
Except the vehicles.
It doesn't kill like Archangel Avacyn if they have that, right? And in fact, Archangel Avacyn's quite good against this card sometimes. But it kills like all the 3/2s, all the 3/1s, all the 2/1s, all the 1/2s. Those guys are all going to the graveyard. Yep.
And I think this is such an awesome deck for a couple other reasons too. First of all, counterspells. Counterspells are really good right now. Now that one of the things that always happens in general when a format becomes very predictable is then you can find the right mix of reactive cards, of interactive cards. And in this spot, for instance, the use of Horribly Awry and Negate, the Void Shatters outnumbering Disallow. That's not the most obvious.
One I was very surprised at. I thought
what do you need to disallow?
I thought Disallow would Void Shatter when it got printed, but no, Void Shatter is doing good work here. He's got the 4th Void Shatter in the sideboard. And, I mean, actually, that's kind of weird to me. 3 Void Shatters and 2 Disallows and then 4th Void Shatter in the sideboard. The main thing that you want to disallow versus some other stuff is like Planeswalker Ultimates, Marvel activations.
You're not just sitting around with them having a Planeswalker in play. Like, yes, obviously that comes up sometimes, but you're so often you've already lost that game.
I was just answering the question. You're like, what do you want to disallow? Those are things you would want to disallow. Those are situations that this deck could find itself in.
Right, but the
it
one
doesn't
that
have aggression to get rid of Planeswalkers.
But exiling Scrap Heap Scrounger that's a game changer. That is a game changer.
I think exiling Scrap Heap Scrounger with Incendiary Flow is great. I think exiling Scrap Heap Scrounger with Horribly Awry is pretty good. I think that you're not going to exile so many Scrap Heap Scroungers with Void Shatter. I think that will happen far less often. It will happen sometimes, but I think that I'm really much more impressed with the Incendiary Flows as an anti-Scrap Heap Scrounger measure myself. But, I mean, I think that's just my biases, right? Like, I like to have fast reactive cards.
One of the interesting little quirks about his list, 3 Kozilek's Return, 2 Horribly Awry, 3 Void Shatter, 4 Dynavolt Tower. Noticing a theme? That's a lot of colorless cards. He literally has 12 colorless cards in his main deck.
So
Ceremony's Rejection.
Oh, it would be good against him?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, it would be great against him. It would be great against him.
Phenomenal.
Just because of the tower, though, right? Like, if you had Ceremony's Rejection, you probably sided in against this deck.
Right. I just think it's interesting. Obviously, Ceremony's Rejection has a lot of strength against Mardu vehicles also. And if you can ever get to a spot where it doesn't hurt you too much that there are, the copycat decks out there that there are. The fact that it hits people's Walking Ballistas, which is a thing that a lot of people are going to right now.
See, I love cards like Ceremonious Rejection when you're able to utilize them to trade your turn for to trade a fraction of your turn or to trade an off turn for their whole turn. Like, I think that's awesome, right?
Yeah, I mean, you were the first person that I know of that said that Spell Snare was just the best. It was just literally the best card in Standard, at least for that set. And you were just like way ahead of the curve in terms of how much you can spend a fraction of your turn beating their turn, or you can spend a turn where normally nobody does anything and trade for their best turn.
So I like those kind of principles a lot, but they're generally good in bridging strategies, right? Which I think this deck benefits from bridging because you just want to if you're playing against Mardu or you're playing against decks that have a faster offense than you, like almost every deck has a faster offense in this deck, right? Then you want to trade fractions of turns where you're generally weak with turns where they're generally strong. And then you get to 6, right? Nobody's beating you on a power for power level when you're at 6, right?
Definitely.
The Mardu deck, their best thing is to do a 4, which is probably a really great card. But your Torrential Gearhulk is worth 10 mana at the point that you're casting it on 6. Like, even if they have answers for it, you're up 3 cards. You're up 6 cards or some ridiculous margin, depending on...
I mean, it's kind of worth... I'd say 9. I mean, we're splitting hairs, but I'm not paying 6 for a 5/6 flash. But it's probably worth 8 or 9 a lot of the time.
Yeah, but it's bonkers how much your value you're getting once you're in that zone, and so you can really dominate the game once you're in that zone. So just bridging to that point is what you want to be able to do. But I think that it's way less good if you're not bridging, right? So I think like just having a card as an answer card is also good, but the problem is if you have the wrong answer or you have it in the wrong order, then it's a disaster, right? Like you have Ceremonious Rejection and you actually have it against a relevant card, but it's not being utilized in a time management way. It's just like, oh, I'm answering this. I actually think that you stand a chance of getting blown at anyway.
So I'm not talking about putting Ceremonious Rejection in this deck.
You're talking about using it to beat this deck, yeah.
I'm talking about this is another step to keep... I mean, Ceremonious Rejection is a card that has showed up in Cultivator's Caravan decks in the past, whether they're Mardu vehicles-ish, or if they're like Metalwork Colossus or whatever. And it's an interesting option to keep in mind if if one finds themselves at a spot like that, because like for instance, Tezzeret, Ceremonious Rejection works well with Tezzeret because of the Ethereum cell. Cultivator's Caravan, any of that kind of stuff. I always like to see when cards that have had spots in the past, when it might be the beginning of a wave where we might see a little bit more of a spot for it again.
Violently agree with you.
Okay. But so what about some of the other decks at this particular event? Like, for instance, which of the two green-black decks did you like the better, There was the Black-Green Delirium deck where the punchline was, a return to Kalitas, and then he has one Ishkana Graf Widow instead of the fourth Verdurous Gearhulk, and then he's playing a bunch of Blossoming Defense. The other one is the Black-Green Energy with very, very similar in that they're both Blossoming Defensing and so on, but he's got the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, Aether Sphere Harvester, Long Tusk Cub, Green Belt Rampager type action.
I'm going to have to vote for Francisco Cifuentes' Black-Green Delirium fatty deck. Like you said, he's got Ishkana Graf Widow, a Return to Kalitas, as well as 3 copies of Verdurous Gearhulk in a very fat deck. So fat, he's got Sky Sovereign, Council Flagship in his sideboard, as well as 2 more cards in his main deck than most people ever play.
See, the only thing that breaks my heart is he's only got 25 land instead of 26.
That's the only thing.
So just a little short of the Jamie Wakefield, but maybe the 3 traverses help make up for it.
Sure, the three traverses change that math, I think, a bit. But I don't know. It's always interesting for me to think about when someone makes a decision like this, that if they go above 60 cards, we've talked about decks like, remember when Ben Rubin did it not that long ago, it made a lot of sense. When they do that, which cards they choose to play. Like I love Tireless Tracker so much. If you're playing a 62 card deck, is it wrong to play 4 Evolving Wilds? I'm not sure. Does that make your deck more or less consistent?
I mean, he's only playing 2 Tireless Trackers. You like Tireless Tracker more than Francisco does.
I love Tireless Tracker, and I love Evolving Wilds. I think Evolving Wilds is one of the most underplayed cards in Standard, and it's played very often. So, think about that for a second. I think it does more in more decks than people tend to realize. And that, like, its cost is relatively low, its upside is very high, and it does exactly what you want. It makes it so you can cast your spells.
It's increasingly becoming important to be able to trigger Fatal Push too, right?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think that
because you want to kill the other person's Tireless Tracker,
or the other person's Rishkar, or the other person's Kalitas. You play these nice cards, you got to be able to cast them. I mean, I don't know. I maybe I'm just so jaded because I'm try to have every possible way I can to interact with my opponent's Felidar Guardian also. But, that's just me. I think that, it's not every day we see a 62-card deck top 8 in Grand Prix. He is playing some substantial breakers, right? Ishkana Graf Widow is tough for both of the mainline aggressive decks to deal with once it's already in play.
I love one Ishkana instead of the fourth Verdurous Gearhulk once you're playing traverses.
Yeah, that's exactly the combo, right? So he's got Evolving Wilds for lands. He's got artifacts from Walking Ballista. In fact, Walking Ballista is one of the easiest cards to trigger to get into the graveyard if you need to, right? He's got instants, he's got creatures, so setting up the Delirium for Traverse isn't too tough for him. I do think that it's perhaps a bit presumptuous to call this a Delirium deck, even though he has Traverse and Ishkana. It's not very Delirium-y.
The thing is, though, that it's the most meaningful differentiator between these styles. One deck has Traverse, one deck has Attune with Ether. And the Attune with Ether kind of tells you what you need to know about the rest of the card choices, for the most part, versus the Delirium, where you're kind of going with that one. It's like... okay, so I guess obviously the Kalitas is in the Delirium one, and the Ishkana is in the Delirium one, and which of them has 8 removal spells and which of them only has 5? Well, I would guess the Delirium has 8 removal spells. They want to make sure to turn on Delirium. So I don't know. I think it's impacting more than just the 4 Delirium cards that are in the deck. The Ishkana. I mean, I guess there's 8, because there's also 4 Grim Flare.
He's got Grim Flare.
I mean, 4 Grim Flare and an Ishkana and 3 Traverse. That's totally a Delirium deck. Although that is even more argument for Evolving Wilds.
So let's talk about the other one. I like the Blossoming Defense that seem to be getting into these deck lists.
It's a great card.
Yeah, I mean, it's also great when people aren't. It's in particular great when people aren't expecting it, right? Because this is a card that was kind of popular near the Pro Tour where it debuted, very popular in Modern, but then it's kind of fallen out of favor in Standard. It's kind of like maybe played in green-red combo energy decks and hasn't been very popular in black-green in a while. I mean, it flips in and out, right? But I also like the playing a number of Blossoming Defense other than 4. Like, I like having the idea that you can keep somebody honest with a small number of Blossoming Defense, and then they really have to kind of vary their thought patterns when they're playing tactically against you.
Mm-hmm. One of the important aspects of it is its ability to disrupt Chandra, because when sometimes black-green can have a real trouble with somebody just dropping Chandra, who killed. So you play a creature, they kill it. You play a creature, they drop Chandra, kill it, and have a Chandra. That's devastating.
Oh yeah, if they're either on the play or they just have 2 removal spells.
Right, and so if they're on the play and they go, you play your 2-drop, they kill it. You play your 2-drop on turn 3, and they drop Chandra. Now, if you just Blossoming Defense in response, it's a blowout. You keep your creature, and you attack and kill Chandra, and then you just have all your mana on your turn to press the advantage.
Yeah, so you traded your Blossoming Defense for their Chandra activation instead of trading your valuable creature, right? You basically stole their turn, jumped mana, and then maybe you can do something big on your turn. Yeah,
that's an awesome way to answer Chandra.
How do you feel about the mana base and creature removal suite that Rafael Bertoli Parra played, even including his sideboard?
So the 3 Hissing Quagmires is it's really hard for me.
Yeah, this mana base is hard.
I can believe. I just it would be. I mean, I'm sure that you don't get there on accident, so he's got to have his reasons, right? But I just think that I think Hissing Quagmire is just like a really strong card.
I have a hard time believing that 3 Hissing Quagmire 5 Swamp is better than 4 Hissing Quagmire 4 Swamp.
Yeah, so
in a 2 with Aether deck, the fact that you want your first, I get it. This deck has Grasp of Darkness ×2 and Fatal Push ×3, which that I actually have a hard time wrapping my head around also, but I get it. You need double black, and you need it on demand. But if that's the case, one of your main vectors to double black is to cast a green spell. So, I don't know, even that small change, I think, is relatively meaningful. Especially if you feel like Lifecraft's just Bestiary in your sideboard.
Yeah.
You just want, extra green going long.
Yeah, plus, honestly, 16 green sources anyway that's real slim when, when I'm playing in a Tune with Aether deck, I'll play 16 once in a while, but I would prefer to have 17 if I have my druthers. And
18?
I'm saying minimum. And so when you're talking about a deck that wants to actually Greenbelt Rampager, and obviously, it's not the word. I mean, it's not the biggest thing. It's just that the marginal utility of the 4th Hissing Quagmire is so high when it's good, and the downside is so small. So the fact that it's helping you both on power by giving you an extra 2/2 Death Touch, and it's giving you consistency from fixing your colors. If it's me, I'm playing 4 Swamp, 4 Quagmire.
Do you love Aethersphere Harvester in this archetype?
I like it enough. I don't know that I love it, but I do like it. It's very important for this deck to have access to ways to interact with flyers, and the fact that it's synergistic with some of the other cards, be it energy to fuel some of the other energy cards, or the fact that you can use it as lifelink every turn from the other energy stuff going this way, to the fact that the extra life can help offset the glint sleeve siphoner type of stuff a little bit sometimes, which isn't the biggest deal, but
it's a thing.
Yeah, and I've always liked when these decks are able to keep people off balance with like actual threes,
I mostly like it for Heart of Kiran interaction. Like,
you have to be able to defend against flyers.
The thing it's just critical for me, which is one of the reasons why I, even early in testing, I became disillusioned with black-green decks in Standard, is black-green creature decks, I should say, is like, I felt so outclassed if I couldn't play Heart of Kiran and they could. So I think that's pretty cool. But kind of on that note, I think in this archetype I prefer the 3 casting cost Nissa. What do you think about that guy? Like, isn't it awesome with...
I don't know.
With Winding Constrictor, and it's awesome with... I don't know.
It is awesome with Winding Constrictor. Well, so it is good with Winding Constrictor. That's true. But a lot of things are good if your Winding Constrictor lives. I think this format has a lot of people playing with a lot of removal spells. There's a lot of people who just show up with 4 Fatal Push and 4 Unlicensed Disintegration, or they have 4 Shock and 4 Unlicensed Disintegration, and they're playing very fast and attacking Planeswalkers very effectively. If you drop Nissa and they have a Heart of Kiran, I mean, you're not really going to drop the Nissa so often, but like Heart of Kiran just matches up so incredibly well against Nissa.
I mean, that is true, but Fatal Push matches up even better against Heart of Kiran, I feel like. You can just take a turn off and play Nissa with black up, and you're going to be, have probably 2 defenders on the ground, and then they go to Heart of Kiran, and then you just kill with Fatal Push, and then, man, all bets are off at that point.
I don't know. I think I would be hesitant to go too hard into Nissa at the moment. I think people are going to be killing your creatures, and I think it's just too easy for people to attack Planeswalkers. Aether Sphere Harvester, and obviously they don't have to be competing with each other, but Aether Sphere Harvester adds a much-needed flying defense component to help make up for the lack of Ishkan the Graph Widow.
Aether Sphere Harvester is a great card, great attacker when both parties have agreed to play fair, I think. Which is, 40% of the game at Standard, so I think that's okay.
Were there any other decks in the top 8 that really stood out to you? Because there were a couple decks in the top 32 I thought that were really clever.
I actually just want to take a second because we've talked about copycat decks almost every week that we focus on Standard since the cards Felidar Guardian and Saheeli Rai were kind of like revealed to be buddies with each other. I want to look at Patricio Roman's version. Did you have a chance to look at that? So,
yep.
Patricio Roman has gone in a completely different direction with only a few subtle changes to Copycat. He's got 2 copies of Attune with Aether and 2 copies of Traverse the Uvenwald.
The classic split.
Instead of the, pretty traditional 4 copies of Attune with Aether. But to pair that Traverse the Uvenwald, which is, as we've mentioned innumerable times, a Delirium card, he's got main deck Ishkan Graph Widow. So if you loved it in black-green, I wonder how you feel about it in Copycat, because Ishkan Graph Widow is one of the absolute best cards that you can play to defend yourself against Mardu.
Yep.
But that's not it. That's not the weird thing. I mean, I can wrap my head around that. These are just cool cards I think you can play. He's also got a Verdurous Gearhulk.
I love it. Switch it on him.
I mean, I don't even... Like, I know what all these cards do. I played Standard. What is up with Verdurous Gearhulk and 4-color Copycat? Is he, copying this with Saheeli Rai?
Dude, Verdurous Gearhulk is a fantastic thing to blink with Felidar Guardian. It's a fantastic thing to copy with Saheeli Rai. It's a fantastic combo with Walking Ballista, where you just go nuts, right?
I was thinking with Whirler Virtuoso. I think that might not be bad at all, right? Even if you only have one flyer.
Right, and then just put all the counters on it and get in there.
Slam for 5.
Dude, Verdurous Gearhulk is great.
This is a very inventive take on an archetype that I thought was exhausted in terms of, like, oh, well, this is just how you play this deck.
I also think the Verdurous Gearhulk adds an important little... I mean, it's a relatively small point, but it adds an important dimension to the Nahiri in the sideboard. Because you would really Nahiri up Verdurous Gearhulk. That's the thing you would really do,
Yeah, you for sure would. You attack for 100...
And then also have a Verdurous Gearhulk in your hand.
Yeah.
Yep. So definitely a cool build,
Yeah, I think this is worth exploring.
Hey, okay, so did you check out Pedro Carvalho's Black-Red Eldrazi deck?
I did.
In the top 32, yeah.
Yeah, 12th place in the top 32. This makes me happy. I like seeing a completely different color combination, a different thing going. Although, I did do a double take on a bunch of his card choices.
Yeah, like which ones?
Like, he's got these sweet cards that have 3 or more power, right? He's got Scrap Heap Scrounger, makes sense. Pianalar, 3 power on the card, right? Even though it's only a 2/2 creature. And then Thought-Knot Seer and Reality Smasher. Like, I want to see 4 Heart of Kirin. That's all. I understand there's diminishing returns on Heart of Kirin, but I think it's just power on the consistency on the second turn. So many people just fold to that card if they can't answer it. What do you think about that?
I mean, I certainly haven't played with his list. It is worth noting that once you've gone to the trouble of playing 4 Ruins of Oran Reef, it's a lot of things are different about your incentives really change a little bit. And I wonder about this the Glint Sleeve Siphoner, if that might be possibly room to make a spot to make room for your Heart of Kirin, because Ruins of Oran Reef, entering the battlefield tapped, get a colorless, and then it also has the option of tap, put a +1/+1 counter on target colorless creature that entered the battlefield this turn. You can do the trick with Heart of Kirin, where you play the Heart of Kirin and then crew it and put a counter on it, because you don't have to respond to anything. It just has to, when you activate the Ruins,
just has to be in play,
and it has to have entered the battlefield this turn. So I think that the 2 Heart of Kirin has even more reason to go up to 3 or 4, because you've already paid for these Ruins of Oran Reef, Why not get your money's worth?
I feel like Glint Sleeve Siphoner might be the weak link in the list, because
it's the only one that doesn't get powered up by it.
Yeah, and I also feel like this deck wants Forerunner of Slaughter. Don't you think Forerunner of Slaughter would be pretty powerful here?
Forerunner of Slaughter, the black-red 3/2?
Yeah.
That's not black-red, he's colorless, but he's a liar.
Yeah, he's black-red, which is the same colors as the mana in this deck, and then he's good with colorless creatures, which is what all these cards in this deck has.
Yeah, no, I'm not playing that. No, almost no chance. There's 4 Ruins of Oran Reef, which is definitely what you want to play on turn 1.
Yep.
But there's also 4 Spire of Industry, which is not going to play the Forerunner of Slaughter on turn 2. And then you also have 4 Aether Hub, and that's a tough way to do it. You also have a Blighted Fen, and obviously you can trim some of these things, but that's part of the value he was getting, was the fact that he's getting more action out of his lands than most people. He's got 5 lands that generate business,
I think Ruins of Oran Reef is probably really powerful in his deck going long. All of his top decks just get to be really, really strong. His Walking Ballistas are just cheaply better than other people's. I think his Scrap Heap Scroungers are probably awesome.
Yep.
I mean, they're always awesome, but his are, in particular awesome.
Reality Smasher has Trample, benefit extra from the counter.
And also...
Aether Spear Harvester's Lifelink, benefit more from the counter.
This is a small thing, but I think that we've talked about Ruins of Oran Reef not that much, and it's a non-legendary land, which means that, if the game goes a long time, you could have, 2 or 3 in play, which means you can activate them all.
Yep.
That's got to be... It's bonkers with a PNLR, right?
It's very exciting, at the very least. I mean, the fact that with Pia Noir, you can not only like get a 1/1 flyer and then put counters on it with the ruins, you can also like get your thing that has all the counters through. You know, the fact that you have a few different artifacts. Obviously, you can like be, you know, sacking Scrap Heap Scrounger over and over and over again. But you also have Walking Ballista, Heart of Kiran, Aether Sphere Harvester. You've got some artifacts in addition so that you can like get something through. I think this is a super cool deck.
I am very excited about Olivia Mobilized for War in this deck, because that's a card that, when it came out, I'm like, man, this card is going to be one of the cards in Standard. And we haven't seen it be one of the cards in Standard. Maybe it should be.
You can discard Scrap Heap Scrounger to Olivia. Oh, you know, like when you play your Olivia on turn 3, and then on turn 4 you can play your Thought-Knot Seer and get in for 8. You know, besides the Olivia brings Olivia works with Scrap Heap Scrounger anyway, because like for instance, if on turn 3 you play Olivia, and on turn 4 you play say like a Glint Sleeve Siphoner, and then you discard a Scrap Heap Scrounger to Olivia, you can actually put the Scrap Heap Scrounger into play. If you have another creature in your graveyard, you know, you can put the Scrap Heap Scrounger into play, discard another Scrap Heap Scrounger or anything else, and now you're attacking for 4 from the Scrounger, 3 from the Siphoner, and 3 from Olivia. So that's 10 right there. I just think it's very exciting. What do you think about the, and this is an exotic one, Rush of Vitality in the sideboard?
I was one of the cards I was exactly going to ask you about. I think that's pretty sweet, right? So target creature gains +1/+0 and gains lifelink and indestructible until end of turn. 2
great abilities.
I mean, like, it's an instant that can stop a point removal spell, and it's like lifelink out of a black-red deck. You know, especially if you've got a card like Reality Smasher. Can you imagine you're coming in with a Reality Smasher? Maybe it's a 6/6 Reality Smasher. Your opponent is loath to kill it, right? But they go, oh, whatever, murder plus discard a card, you know, to get rid of it. And then you have this. So you're like, flip the script by gaining life, not just having a huge trampling creature, and like counter 2 cards out of their hand. And like it doesn't matter how many blockers they have.
Yeah, I was going to say, even if they go the more common approach and just gang block the Reality Smasher, my goodness, does Reality Smasher love to have a Rush of Vitality.
I love that card in this deck. I love 1. I love the variability that it puts into games, and when you draw it and you just like, it's not the old Hannibal thing, which is I love it when a plan comes together, but this just foils the opponent's plan. Like the opponent's just like a thinking opponent. It's like going to look at this like, oh, how do I have to sequence my turns to beat these cards? These aren't the cards I prepared for, but I know what they do. This is a powerful card. I'm going to do this and this and this. Like one card like the Rush of Vitality is just going to mess up everything that they were planning for. And my God, how bad is it for them in a 3-game set if you win game 2 this way? And they're like, oh my God, how many Rush of Vitalities did he side in? Will really, really mess your brain up, I think.
Maybe. I think it will mess your brain up. That's true. I wouldn't speculate too much about how many, although now it's just going to be so sick to play 2. Nobody expects the second Rush of Vitality.
Yeah, you know who expects the second Rush of Vitality? Far fewer people than expected the first Rush of Vitality. But I like this deck a lot. I think that it's certainly worth thinking about. And I agree that Glint Sleeve Siphoner is the weak link.
Yeah, I think it's just you're getting enough of a multiplier on your colorless creatures that I'd rather just lean in that way. And it's I mean, Heart of Kiran's even easier to cast, like, meaningfully. Like, a lot of the land in this deck are not playing the Siphoner on, too.
Yeah, I dislike the Harvester in this deck more than I dislike it in most decks. This deck doesn't even have a very strong energy sub-theme.
No. Actually, it's surprisingly, it's important the other way. Aether Sphere Harvester is part of how you're able to turn your Aether Hubs back on. Because this deck doesn't support Unlicensed Disintegration very easily. It only has 12 dedicated Swamp Mountain. It's got 3 mountains and 3 Foreboding Ruins. It's hard to cast. That's only 6 sources. If you count your 4 Spire of Industry, now you need a parlay, right? And if you count your 4 Aether Hubs, they run out. Aethersphere Harvester, it turns on your Spire of Industry, and it turns on your Aether Hub.
Do you love Spire of Industry in this deck? I typically love Spire of Industry. I actually think that it's not the best option here.
Oh, I don't know. I think it is. I think Spire of Industry is I don't know. I think it's despite how crazy this might sound, I think it is grossly underplayed. I think Spire of Industry is a really troubled card, and that it was a mistake to get printed this way. I don't think it's a slam dunk, because it is very possible, if you're really only going to play 2 colors, that you might end up getting some extra value out of some of the, like the 4th Foreboding Ruin or whatever. But I'd rather just be on I would rather just be on Spire of Industry, so that I have that consistency of being untapped.
What's the battle land?
You're talking about Smoldering Marsh?
Yeah.
I mean, with only 9 basics, I hate Smoldering Marsh here. I mean, it's like, I would rather, if I was playing like a curve deck like this, I would really want to have, my preference would be 14 basics, but I could get away with 12 if I'm like super greedy and always take the first turn off or whatever. But like, I just don't know why I don't know why you'd bother. Like, Spire of Industry does what you need, other than cast Glint Sleeve Siphoner, but I don't know that you really need
This deck doesn't take the first turn off that often, actually. Right? He's got like Fatal Push and Shock. He has additional Shock in the sideboard. Like,
Ruins of Oran Reef is the other big one, is on turn 1.
Yeah, his payoff there, like we said before, is really strong.
What do you think about the mix of walkers in the sideboard? Do you like 2 Chandra, 1 Ob Nixilis?
I love
and 1 Liliana?
I love the Walker transformation a ton. It's just like in the Mardu deck, but obviously he doesn't have like Nahiri because he doesn't have white, but I like it a lot. I think Ob Nixilis is actually generally underplayed in Standard. I think that the 1 Liliana is a little odd, but I like it. I don't know. I think that card is weirdly played, and maybe weirdly played here. Like, I feel like numbers on Lilianas should be higher if people are playing them. So I think
it still has diminishing returns, man.
Yeah, you always say that, but
it's always true.
Diminishing returns on relatively low loyalty planeswalkers that you play on the 3rd turn aren't that diminishing, because you want to draw it in the matchups that you want to play the card. You want to draw it early if you can, and it has a high frequency of dying. Like, you can kill it yourself, right? That's the other thing, right? This is exactly the kind of deck that is like +1 once and then go -2/-2 or something. If you have a second one, it's not that hard to get out of.
I don't know, man. I
think that the double black might be more prohibitive than the diminishing returns on a second copy.
I don't know, man. I drew 2 Lilianas in the same game at the Pro Tour, and I can tell you the second one does not give you a meaningful it's not the most meaningful of option when the board isn't right to play the first one, Yeah,
but you also weren't playing a deck with 2-drop creatures.
Yeah, no question.
Like, if you have like Scroungers and Hearts and Glint Sleeve Siphoners and you're trading, you have like fast removal spells, I think that Liliana is very different in a deck like that than if you're actually using it to beat a control deck.
Last one, the there were a couple copies of Ulamog Marvel. Was there anything that stood out to you any different here or notable? Obviously, there's a little bit of tweaking and tuning that has gone on, but for the most part, it's the Aetherworks, the sort of team or Aetherworks strategy we talked about last week, but with extra creatures.
Are you talking about, for example, Pedro Pereira Jr.'s Teamer Aetherworks he came in 25th with?
Yeah, there's also his has even more creatures, and he's got the Shielded Aether Thieves, but also Tulio Jondi finished 26th with 4 Servant of Conduit, 4 Rogue Refiner, 4 Whirler Virtuoso, 4 Ulamog, and a Tireless Tracker. There
is something that in Tulio's deck that is kind of a head scratcher for me. I see this card getting played fairly often, and, even when it seems pretty good against me, I don't get it. What's up with Baral's expertise? What is that good for? I mean, when you see people play that, what goes through your head? Like, what is this good for? What is the answer they're trying to come together with?
Well, I mean, in this spot, there's a variety of different things that it's contributing, right? So one part is that you can take care of whatever needs to happen on the board while also playing your Marvel in the same turn. So, like, when you're actually cheating an Aetherworks Marvel into play, you spent 1 mana to get 3 boomerangs. So that's like a pretty big spin. But then in games where you need tempo, you can use Baral's expertise that way, both tempo bouncing their stuff and tempo, in that you're getting this mana cheat. But also in games where you have plenty of mana, if you're actually just grinding, you can bounce your own Rogue Refiner, bounce your own Whirler Virtuoso. Hell, you can bounce your Woodweaver Puzzle Knot or even your Ulamog. It's also it's a card you can hit with Aetherworks Marvel that has a big impact on the board that doesn't just cost $1 million, It's got a little bit of the Ishkana thing going on in terms of being like a passable hit for Marvel in certain spots, and also like a reasonable card early on, a problem solver that helps you get out of tough spots. It's a good card. It's a good card.
What do you think about Tulio not playing Glimmer of Genius and Pedro playing a bunch of Glimmer of Genius? I thought Glimmer of Genius, when I was playing Aetherworks, was a pretty strong 4.
It really depends. I don't have enough to know, like enough experience to know the difference between 3 and 4 in Pedro's deck. I could believe it. I mean, he's also riding these shielded Aether Thieves, and the only having 3 Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot is the part that actually gets me a little bit more. I think
Puzzle Knot is so great. It's just the best curve. You're just like, turn 2 Woodweaver's Puzzle Knot, turn 3, use it, turn 4, get you.
And I like the 6 life in this format.
Speaking of 6 life, the one card that is super baller in Tulio's deck is Nissa's Renewal.
Mm-hmm. That's 7 life.
7 life, not just 6. But the subtle thing here is you can cast it for 6. You go 6 to 9, and then you can just cast your Ulamogs.
Yep.
That's the thing that's pretty cool about that. I almost played more than... I mean, I didn't play any, but I thought about playing multiple. Maybe I should have. I lost a lot of games with multiple Ulamogs in my hand. The one card that is weird to me is Dampening Pulse.
No, I mean, it's like half as much... It's like an Authority of the Consuls, but for 4 instead of 1. Because, like, when you put it out, the Felidar Guardian, the copycat player can't win anymore.
All right.
At least not, like, baseline. They can win. It's just they can't combo you out the same way.
I guess you can cast it off of Servant on turn 3 also, which is pretty good.
Yep.
All right. Fair enough. So there were some exciting innovations in Teamer Aetherworks decks in the top 32 as well. For me, I thought that Pedro Carvalho's Black-Red deck was the most interesting, other than, of course, the winner's deck, Victor the Victor with his 20...
Teamer Aether, or Teamer Dynavolt Tower.
Yeah, 22-land Dynavolt Tower deck. What was your favorite innovation of Porto Alegre?
Definitely the winner's deck. I mean, I thought that the Black-Red one was the most clever. I think it could be sweet. It's just that it might be the biggest gain in terms of tech relative to what the perception would have been before. However, I personally don't think it's likely to be where I would want to be. Whereas this Dynavolt Tower deck, I think this deck actually has the potential to. This is like, it was already a fringe strategy on the cusp that was probably a little underrated, but this version involves several innovations that are a meaningful advancement in the archetype, and I think that I think this is going to shake up the metagame a little bit. I
agree, especially the reduction to only 1 Anticipate. That's really changing the paradigm.
How many people do you think are just going to play 1 Anticipate next week? Just because that's the number you play.
All of them? I mean, like, the thing that is shocking to me is almost every burn deck I see in Modern now has this exact same mana base. And they have the mana base because Roman made a mistake when he won regionals a few weeks ago. And now they all have the same mana base. And so I assume that people will just copy this thing that based on whatever the winning deck list is. So I think, yes, all of them will have one Anticipate.
All right. Well, awesome stuff, man. Glad to see Standard picking up some momentum again.
Changing it up. All right. Thanks a lot, Patrick.
All right. See you guys next week.
Bye-bye.
Life didn't work so great. Tried to play Dredge for jail or hate. Ghostly prison waiting for my untapped phase. Your core trapped in amber state.